Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming and more Diablo 4 Season 8 talk. Today I'm doing my review of the season, an overview of it all, the best and worst parts. So let me give you my thoughts on each thing, let's get into it. Starting with some season specific topics, like the fact that they actually nerfed leveling. For me, this worked fine in the end. As usual, I jump into the game with both Josh and Zach, and we just absolutely blast as long as we can for that day. For the last little while, that's usually resulted in us completing whatever it is and reaching Endgame proper, at very least being in Torment 1 or beyond. And while there definitely was a leveling nerf compared to Season 7 to 8, there was no change in the results of that. For that first day, we ended up in Endgame, in Torment 1, as we usually do. So personally, I don't think it caused any issues, but I would be interested to hear from them in regards to, their fireside chat streams, what the average percent was for people that reached the end game and in how long, because that's what they were telling us last time. They also increased the difficulty of Torment 4, but that didn't really happen too much for me either. So I wonder again about the average player base. How much harder was Torment 4 for you compared to before? They definitely made it a bit harder, but if you're already playing like the best build or one of the best builds, you already know how to gear up and maximize the resources you have. You know how to push yourself into each next stage of the game. Having said that, I do think the Torment 4 version of the bosses were a lot harder, but a part of that was the new mechanics, but mostly the very irritating invincible frames that they got. So we'll talk about that in a sec. How was the season story this time? Yeah, I don't really remember. In fact, what I do remember about that is Belial and how we encountered him in the same general way we encounter whatever relevant bad is happening for the season story, and we deal with it in the same few ways that we always do. Ultimately ending with the final battle where I literally one-shot the final version of Belial, which felt like a bit of a sad result. Obviously, the proper Lair boss itself was a lot more engaging, especially that first kill. I do think the rep system works well enough, and I can see why they keep using it. It gates you to the next part of the season story, which does give you good rewards. It encourages you to farm rep. They definitely needed to buff rep from other sources outside of Lair boss farming though, because that's pretty much where I got all of my rep, just killing bosses over and over. In regards to the Apparition Incursions, I thought they were pretty fun. Essentially just a permanent Helltide Maiden event where you deal with 2 bosses at once and then you get to fight Belial at the end. It's not overly complicated. I found on day 1 it quite funny and fun to try to click the eyes and get the 12 for the season journey. While everyone's doing the same thing, it made it engaging for a little bit. Otherwise, it was just show up, kill stuff, and not think about it, and the boss mechanics became irrelevant very quickly. But at least, when you're going into Torment 2 or 3 or 4 for the first time, and you're a bit undergeared and underpowered, they were challenging, and you were doing the mechanics, which is nice. The fact that there was 10 unique bosses kept it fresh, and you're hopeful for actually a fresh boss to get a boss power you've not yet unlocked. As a familiar twist on that open world event that they've been doing many times, it was a good version of it. And for ease of play, man, it was nice not to be, patrolling with an NPC that circle is too small for the event, or guiding cats to a tree, those kind of annoying chores. It was just the best part of Diablo, which is killing stuff, and not anything else getting in the way of that. In regards to the boss power system, I thought that was a really cool borrowed power mechanic, and they did it well because it was very forgiving. If you kill a boss, you instantly get the power, and that's it. There's no cost to unequipping it or re-equipping it, and to level it up, you don't have to kill that boss again. It's just a universal resource, the ash, that you can get from different types of content. Namely, again, most of that resource came from farming Lair bosses, because I wanted mythic uniques though, but at least it doubled up. I love the way that it encouraged you to go out and kill every boss in the game to collect all the powers. And I really like the changes with the Lair boss systems where you can just summon the boss for free and kill it, and that gives you the power. You don't need the key. Specifically for the boss power system, I also liked how clear and straightforward it was to understand and use this time. You have a main power, and that's the one that physically activates and does a thing. Then the supporting powers, there's only 3 of them, and they're pretty straightforward too. Most of the boss powers were a hit in terms of mechanics and interest, and the way that you could double dip on things, like we're seeing with the Sorcerer and the Enlightenment passive, giving a massive amount of increased frost damage, as well as rogues doing something similar to make the beast in the ice power, that sleet attack, actually really strong and fun to use. Obviously, they heavily nerfed it compared to the PTR, where basically boss powers decided everything. Now, you just kind of synergize the boss powers in an effective way. There definitely has been some fails, like that recent situation with The boss power that consumes vulnerable to stun in AoE, combining that with Zir's mod support to make that deal damage too, and then that being bugged with a specific aspect that means, you're generating permanent vulnerable and it's not actually working, it's not being consumed by that boss power. Just a permanent AoE stun and damage. And unfortunately it causes quite a bit of lag, so that was a big problem for the boss powers in this season. But that's pretty much the only case of that we've seen, so overall not too buggy. A bit of interesting thought behind them to work with different builds and why. Not every boss power was a hit or even used, but a majority of them were interesting and have been at least worth engaging with. So I'd say that's a success. When it comes to the Lair bosses and thoughts for that, it's both positives and negatives. The way they changed the summoning materials to be keys, awesome. The way you can summon the boss for free and kill it without a resource, awesome. I think the chests themselves are a reasonable system to prevent the whole mooching and kind of monotonous grind that existed before, but did it really change it? No, not really. Ultimately, you're going to the bosses and essentially destroying them and then waiting for your loot and hoping it actually drops this time. Now we're just encouraged to do it in a group because, extra drops. But my god, did they introduce a lot of iframe mechanics to the bosses. Way too many. And it's like one of the most annoying parts of a boss fight. When you're there and you're dealing big damage and the boss just goes, yeah, but I'm completely immune to damage. You're going to deal with this mechanic. Even though you've played well, you've got this awesome build, we're going to take away the satisfaction from you absolutely destroying me with just straight up iframes. It feels like a short-sighted temporary fix for a greater issue in the boss system, in that these bosses just don't have enough health, or you give them too much health so only the absolute best builds have enough DPS to kill them. Their mechanics are overly harsh, quite one-shotty, or just do nothing at all. How do you successfully achieve a middle ground with this setup? And so iframes feels like a very unfun solution that almost seems necessary at this point. I do hope they crack this though, because I do think the bosses are cool, but very quickly they're not fun to engage with. But I am speaking from the perspective of someone that has to kill them hundreds and hundreds of times in the hopes of getting a mythic unique, right? How many people actually care enough to do that versus people that just do the fights a few times and have a good time with them? I will say that Belial, as a new addition to the game, his supreme form, that was a super fun fight where the mechanics worked. There weren't actually annoying iframes this time. There were just mechanics that were invasive, so invasive that you have to respect them and maybe stop your DPS. But overall, that fight was the mechanically best boss fight that I've seen in Diablo. So that's a huge success. If they're all like Belial, where there is no iframes, but the mechanics force you to stop and think about them, I'd be much happier. But the quality of life changes were really nice, like being able to teleport straight to the bosses, cleaning up that process, simpler materials in the form of the keys and just one key for each boss. So overall, definitely a success, but I just want them all to be like that Belial fight rather than iframey. Couple things to think about though were, say, the new battle pass system in the new season journey. What they did with the battle pass system is basically allow you to focus on what you want, so you can unlock things in your own order rather than being forced to get through the whole path until you eventually hit the item or cosmetic that you actually wanted to unlock. I much prefer this, and I think it's a cool system that they've done. On the other hand, you have the season journey where they wanted to make it harder and more interesting, but the rewards better maybe. I do think they've been successful with making it feel fresh and more interesting and worth engaging with, but I also think they definitely overdid it with some of those harder challenges towards the end where it reaches a bit more, well, extreme levels. Having to use a really bad boss power setup to go defeat Lilith, who is just swarming in iframes for most of the fight with constant one-shot mechanics, that was frustrating as hell. That final chapter should probably be like, find your first mythic unique, craft your first mythic unique, collect one of all boss powers, defeat Belial solo, defeat Belial as a full group, complete like a high level pit without dying a single time or within like a pretty tight time limit, as like a special challenge, instead of making me make my build significantly worse to fight iframes, And a lot of those final challenges were basically the same thing. So good update. They just kind of ran out of ideas, it feels like. For more universal topics that do affect Season 8, of course, you have things like the current variety of the endgame content. I do think it's getting pretty stacked now. You've got Infernal Hordes, you've got the Nightmare Dungeons, the Pits, you've got Incursions, the Lair boss system, you have the Undercity, Whispers, timed events like the Legion events or the World bosses, Helltide, all serving their own purpose, or double dipping a little bit, where, you know, you could do nightmare dungeons for masterworking materials, or you could do infernal hordes, or the way that they changed the drops. So infernal horde drops, you know, the uniques there, you might find them from killing Lair bosses now. I think it's in a great state in that regard. There's only one form of kind of dead content right now, which is the Citadel, which just doesn't work. You have to do it in a group. It's overly long. The bosses are a little bit long. The rewards just aren't really worth the time investment that's forced upon you due to just the raw size of it, which I think is very unfortunate, and I do hope they repurpose it or rebalance it to make it relevant. I would say for Season 8, getting to the point where you can do all of the content and engage with the majority of the systems and have a good time is kind of better than ever. Being established in Torment 4 and functional there felt great. The problem, and the part that feels really bad this season, is kind of like reaching the maximum level, the perfect gear, the highest pit pushing. That is not fun at all. You've got this ridiculous masterworking situation where the materials required are absolutely ludicrous to get your perfect setup. Good luck with that. It takes ages and so much farming. It's not confirmed, but the mythic unique drop rate, despite the Lair boss changes, feels so much worse. And then good luck actually crafting one. Runes were made rarer in Season 7, and they're still super rare in Season 8, but now it feels even harder to get your hands on them. So if you want to craft a mythic unique, you're just never going to find those drops. You have to trade, and because they're rare, they're unbelievably expensive in terms of gold and trading. Despite that, I've been able to craft a mythic unique most seasons. This one, worst by far. I did not enjoy that, and I think that's one of the biggest problems of Season 8 is the mythic unique situation. Way too harsh, really annoying. They need to make runes drop more so that the crafting system actually works without player trading specifically, or make mythic uniques just drop more often, I guess. I think between the two, they probably want you to do the crafting, you know, earn the runes, earn the craft, fair enough. But it's way too harsh and basically not doable right now. And I don't know about you, but there comes a point with pit pushing where it's absolutely not fun anymore. And that's like the high-end final best content you can do with a maximized build. And it's just a shame there's not something more interesting you can do. But at least there's something. In regards to builds and class balance, I think it's been pretty decent overall, like shockingly good in fact, except for Spiritborn, which has had a really bad time in Season 8 for some reason. But you know, Sorcerer has definitely won out overall with the ridiculous power of enlightenment and letting them just work most any build around that. Barbarian's done really well. Druid has good power. Necromancer got quite lucky with two amazing builds that work really well in the form of Blood Spear and of course Blood Wave. I like that Barbarian had something a bit fresh in the form of Minion Barbarian that's become very strong and popular. Death Trap Rogue is working and is fun. Really, I just think it's Spiritborn that has to play Quill Volley again, and Druid that's back on Cataclysm that I feel kind of bad for them. They made a big point on the live stream that they don't want the same build to be the best again. So take Necromancer. Yeah, a lot of us are playing Blood Wave again, but Blood Spear, completely viable and a completely new and fun build. That's a relative success for most classes, I would say. And the balance of it's pretty good. I mean, if you look at the pit clears right now, they're all standing at 111 or higher. No one's massively ahead except for Sorcerer by like 5 tiers. It's just Spiritborn that's noticeably behind the rest and needs some love. I think the dev reactions have been better overall this season. They did say that they're not waiting as long now. They don't feel so afraid to make changes, which is a good thing. So we're seeing faster fixes, but what does that really mean? Well, it's mostly meant just disabling specific items and uniques when it's absolutely busted. It does feel like their response so far hasn't been as quick and as impressive as we were hoping, but at least if anything's been absolutely ridiculous, they've essentially just turned it off, and pretty quickly, so that's good. We'll see how they do the balancing though, where, you know, you got things like Sorcerer that's doing great, but I don't want to see them nerfed. I want to see others pushed upwards. Overall then, I think Season 8 has been a successful launch of a bunch of new systems and ideas. Naturally, some of them fell flat, or definitely need tuning. That's what I expected. Next time, I hope to see the season journey a bit more interesting than some of those forced, repeat, very similar tasks in that last chapter. That no class ends up in a really bad state like Spiritborn kind of did. That they solve the rune or mythic drop situation in a good way. That we see more like Belial in boss design than iframey like the Harbinger or Lilith. Despite various issues though, I was able to do everything I wanted to do in the season, and I think that's the most important thing. I think most of the game and what you want to do in it is there and doable and fun, while on the other end of things, I think maximizing and achieving like a perfect build and pushing the absolute furthest you can is quite the chore and not in a good state. Overall, more positive than negative. I'm just hopeful to see if they can improve on these new ideas in Season 9. But what did you guys think? Did you enjoy Season 8? What were the best and worst parts for you? Let us know. But for now, I've been Hollow, you've been new. Thanks for watching.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.